Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for Monday, March 27th, 2017. There is a lot to talk about today. Going to jump right in and actually talk about a cyclone. It is the Southern Hemisphere cyclone season, and we have one here, Tropical Cyclone Debby, off the coast of Queensland in Australia, near Bowen. I'm going to show you on a Google map in just a minute. Remember, in that area of the world, the circulation is clockwise with the storm and counterclockwise with the outflow. So when I'm talking about hurricanes in the northern hemisphere, I talk about the anticyclonic outflow. Well, in this case, we talk about the cyclonic outflow and the anticyclonic inflow, I guess you could say, the circulation of the storm. Otherwise, they are pretty much the same thing. They're just in the southern hemisphere, and because of the way the physics is on our planet, the circulation goes clockwise with these tropical systems. And you see a lot of deep convection associated with it. The eye was clearer earlier, fairly large eye, seems to be filling in just a little bit now. And this is the area that it looks like it's going to make landfall near or over. It's moving very slow right now, maybe stalling out somewhat. And there's a little town in here called Bowen, and that's where the radar site is. If you've been following that on Twitter, I've highlighted it here on the Google map. And the center of the cyclone still out here somewhere. This is reef country, if you want to call it that. And you got these little islands out here, probably an incredible area of Australia. I've never been, but I bet it is amazing out there. And unfortunately, they're going to get quite the beating here from a cyclone passing over the reef area, and then, as I showed you, it's kind of coming in, meandering around a little bit, and then it should just come on in and eventually dissipate over portions of interior Australia over the coming days. But again, here's a satellite picture of it. This is that area where those islands are, right in here. Let's see if I can highlight that in yellow. So that area right there corresponds to this area right here, and the core sitting just offshore, again, kind of meandering around, maybe coming in near Bowen, maybe near, what is that, Proserpine, something like that, and we'll see. A couple of chasers out there, James Reynolds and Josh Morgerman. If you follow those gentlemen on Twitter, you'll find lots of updates from them. The world we live in, small enough now that people can travel even to Australia. Josh coming from Southern California, and James Reynolds, I believe, coming from Japan to intercept and cross paths with Debby. We wish them the best of luck, and we'll see what they show us on Twitter, the amazing world of social media. So let's jump into the sea surface temperature anomalies. I want to start off the rest of today's tour of the different graphics and things I want to cover with this. And you notice a few interesting things. Certainly the warmth here staying in the Nino 1 and 2 area. I want to get rid of these maps here, just these graphics. Helps free up some of the processes in my old laptop here. Much better, much smoother. So we have this very warm area here in the Nino 1-2 area off the coast of Peru. And a lot has been said and made about that, rightfully so. The devastating floods as it affects the local atmosphere. And, some speculation that maybe we will get an El Nino now developing from east to west, coming this way, instead of the typical, at least what we saw the last time, where the El Nino kind of built in from west to east and filled in all the spaces in between. So we'll keep monitoring this and see what happens. There's still a few cold anomalies here in the central Pacific. Overall, the Pacific as a whole, again, kind of hanging on the slightly warm side of what we call the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And you'll see what that means in just a moment. I've got some great examples. Meanwhile, the Southwest Atlantic and parts of the Caribbean anomalously cooling, and much has been made of that in recent days from Phil Klotzbach, Colorado State University, the tropical cyclone forecasting guru for the seasonal outlooks anyway. Really noticing this deep change in temperature here. Will it hold and go on into the hurricane season? Well, nobody knows for sure, but it certainly is curious as to why it's happened and the fact that it's even there. Meanwhile, the eastern Atlantic here, off the coast of the Iberian Peninsula and the west coast of Africa, cooling off as well. So The Atlantic not nearly as warm as it was this time last year. We'll see what difference that makes. You figure by the time we get to September, water temperatures will be at 80 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, pretty much all over the place. Something like this, roughly, is how the 26 degrees Celsius or 80 degree Fahrenheit isotherm usually looks. By the time we get to September, anything inside that line is usually warm enough. It's a matter of how much above normal will it be, and we just don't know. Different climate models suggesting different things. And again, part of that, we can look at the SOI, trying to figure out about what's happening with the El Nino, or more specifically in a general, specifically and generally, I guess, are two different things, aren't they? But the ENSO is the El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomenon, and then specifically, it is the El Nino part that we're, I guess, most concerned about right now. That's what I meant to say. So looking specifically at the numbers, remember what I've told you, that positive values, well, they're not El Nino, put it that way. And the 30-day has really come up. You see where we were in February? So if you take what we had in February plus this, we've got a 6.5 point rise from February's numbers. And the 90-day is creeping up much closer to 1. So that's on the positive side, obviously. And today's contributor is positive 5.93. We have a few days left in March. We'll see if these numbers indeed stay positive. And then March will come into we'll lose December. We'll have January, February, March. And we'll see what this 30-day number is. It matters because the pressure pattern still is not conducive for a significant El Nino to develop. Now, the latest in the equatorial temperature anomaly subsurface maps has updated. We'll get a new one here in the next few days as well. This one's from March 19th. There's always a lag with this, but they stay pretty close to staying on top of it. Notice here in the eastern Pacific, there's your bullseye of very, very warm subsurface anomalies. And that right there, my friends, translates to this area right here along the surface. So this is what it looks like in the subsurface, and you saw what it looked like at the surface. That translates into warming above the long-term average, significantly so here close to Peru in the subsurface and along the surface waters. Now, this is a very small area compared to what we had in 2015, where this enormous large blob of warm anomalies was moving across something like this in this area around this time. It was really starting to get started, beginning to get started, and it was well on its way. We saw the writing on the wall. So as I look at this, I say, well, there's, again, mixed signals. You still have this sort of bowl here of neutral and some warm anomalies in the western Pacific at depth. And then this certainly does raise some eyebrows, but we'll see, because if you get strong trade winds over on the eastern side of the Pacific and any upwelling that would occur, you see there's not a lot of warm water waiting down here. So any upwelling because of strong trades in the eastern Pacific, you blow the water this way, you replace it with water from the subsurface, and that water really isn't too warm. There's some of neutral right there, but we're not seeing a very deep layer of this extremely warm water. So we'll keep an eye on this. It's fascinating to see how this is evolving from week to week as it plays out. Now, that's a cold PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. This is from the same time period that we're in now, in 2008. I just wanted to show you what the end of March looked like in some of these different years that we have gone through, all right? So there's the cold look to the Pacific, the cold Pacific Decadal Oscillation. But notice, too, the Atlantic was kind of warm here in the eastern Atlantic, cold in the western Atlantic. And 2008 ended up being a very big hurricane season, including Hurricane Ike. And I'm not saying that this has any bearing on what might happen this year. We're just going to kind of go back and look at different ends of March, okay? And that's all this is. It's just a look back in time. So this is what it looked like in 2010 at the end of March. The Pacific was starting to warm just a little bit down here in the equatorial region, surrounded by a large area of colder than normal anomalies. Curiously, at this time, of course, we had the big Deepwater Horizon BP oil disaster in the Gulf, and coincidentally, most of the Gulf of Mexico, with the exception of the loop current, was well below normal. Some speculation that the two were related. I haven't found any connection where it would affect that much of the Gulf. That's just crazy. And then you see the rest of the Atlantic here, all the way out from the Gulf to the Atlantic, with this one strip in the Northwest Atlantic being the exception. It was a very strange year that year. It ended up that 2010 was a very busy season. Lots and lots of named storms. No hurricanes hit the United States in 2010. Most of the Atlantic was just very warm, and the hurricanes were spread out all over the place. We had Igor that impacted Bermuda, and Earl passed about 100 miles east of the east coast of the U.S., but that was it. Moving on along to 2012, the year of Isaac and Sandy. What was it like that year? Again, the Pacific on the whole in the cold PDO phase. The Gulf this time of year, just like we're seeing now for the most part, very, very warm. In fact, in 2012, it seems like it was warmer. I mean, here's what it looks like then. This is what it looks like now. Yeah, I'd say that 2012 was warmer in the Gulf of Mexico. But notice, the main development region here, the MDR in 2012, was well below normal. And that season ended up Sandy, right, in late October. That was a very busy year as well, 2012. So you just never know, right? 2014, Pacific started warming up, the positive PDO coming into play. The Atlantic was warm here in the subtropics, kind of the opposite of what we saw in 2010, for example. Very cold for the most part down here in the deep tropics at the end of March. This is not in September, mind you. I'm just showing you how things were this time of year. And again, you can just see that this kind of doesn't mean anything once we, go out into the hurricane season. You look at these temperatures and you say, ooh, this might happen or that might happen. Well, maybe, but it's hard to draw correlations from March sea surface temperature anomalies to what might happen later on. We might need another 100 years of data to be able to do that. Finally, last year, the Pacific very warm as a whole. Most of the Atlantic was quite warm. Tropical regions of the planet were very warm. We had a very warm year. Globally, the warmest year on record, I do believe, was said. The El Nino was fading away here, and then we eventually wound up with a very warm Atlantic. And we had a pretty busy latter half of the season, ending with pretty big impacts, obviously, from Matthew, and then Otto down in Central America. Both of those names, by the way, are retired from the list. So in 2022, they will be replaced by Martin, replacing Matthew, and Owen, replacing Otto. Little tidbit for you there if you didn't know that. Looking at the actual sea surface temperatures, getting away from the other analysis now, more to real time, what's happening out there. Again, shelf water is warming up slowly but surely. It's interesting with those colder anomalies showing up down here now. Maybe this won't be as warm as fast. Yeah, like I said, it doesn't necessarily matter, because we know by the time we get to June, July, August, and beyond, the Gulf of Mexico will be more than capable of supporting intense hurricanes. Right now, just kind of looking out for anybody that wants to go surfing or playing in the water down here. Colder over here in the northeast Gulf than it is on the northwest side. These temperatures are going to be real close to getting in with just a bathing suit on, no wetsuit needed, fairly soon. I mean, there's 25 degrees Celsius right there, so it's not far behind. So you folks in the Texas and Louisiana coastal waters, it's coming. Just be patient. Meanwhile, this is kind of neat. I like this. Look at this right here, this kind of dark hatched line, or whatever you want to call it, this fill color. Well, that's just because of the gradient. There's so many temperature changes or gradients, what we call isotherms, lines of equal temperature, button up against each other, that it looks like it's just kind of black through here and black through here. I think that's really neat when you see that. So basically, you've got water temperatures here in the mid-70s, and then just a few miles away, literally just a few dozens of miles away, water temperatures are easily in some cases, the 40s and 50s. And so between the two is that gradient, a pretty steep gradient, or tight gradient as we call it. Anyway, water temperatures warming up nicely along the Carolinas, maybe a little bit ahead of where they should be. Meanwhile, up here in the northwest Atlantic off the coast of New England, no major, nothing jumps out at me as, oh, it's much warmer or much colder. It certainly isn't as bad as it was 2 years ago. There was icebergs up here, for goodness sakes. Looking ahead to the severe weather coming up over the next few days, today, and again, I like to do lower 48 in case there's a big outbreak of severe weather. Just kind of touch upon it, make sure people are aware while I've got your attention. The day one outlook here in parts of the Tennessee Valley, Mississippi, Alabama, pretty decent setup for severe weather, so make sure you check that out on the National Weather Service site in your local area. Moving on to day two, pretty much the same, if this will load for me, except that it shifts back more towards Oklahoma and Texas as these pieces of energy come across the U.S. and tap into the warm Gulf moisture and then cooler, drier air coming out of Canada, these two colliding with the energy coming out between. It's going to be an active period. And again, I'm wanting to just broad brush this for you to make you aware, and then you should go to weather.gov, put in your zip code, or follow your local favorite meteorologist to make sure you stay on top of what's happening, because we're getting into severe weather season, and that warm Gulf here transporting that moisture is going to equal a lot more energy for these storms, and we should have a busier tornado season than we have seen in the last few years. This is the day 3 outlook. And again, it starts to move out from the Great Plains into parts of the Ozarks, eastern Texas, northwest Louisiana, and you can bet that by days 4 through 8 that this will continue to advance to the east-northeast with time probably being an active period in parts of the deep south. So stay aware of that. I want you to be able to come back and enjoy these Outlook videos, right? All right, covered a lot today, and that's good because, that's what I do. I enjoy doing this, and I appreciate you tuning in. It means a lot to me. That is it from me for today. Have a great rest of your Monday. Again, I am Mark Sudduth for hurricanetrack.com. As always, I do appreciate you tuning in, and I'll talk to you again next week.